Now I want to introduce Anica Butler, who is a Nieman Fellow with us this year. She's a deputy editor at the Boston Globe and has been an integral part of the Globe's digital reinvention. She's been on the Spotlight, an editor on the Spotlight team, and was part of the team that won a Pulitzer Prize in 2014 for their coverage of the Boston bombing. And most importantly, she is an alum of a school that is represented here tonight, this afternoon rather, Florida A&M. I just, really quick, show of hands, how many of you are seniors? And how many are juniors? Okay, so this is something that's going to be on your mind kind of and how many of you think you want to go into journalism after college? Great. Okay, well, this panel will help you. I'm going to turn it over to Anica, and she'll introduce the other panelists.
Hi, everyone. Okay, this is working. Hope you guys are having a great day here. As Samantha said, I currently work at the Boston Globe, and one of the things that I've gotten to do the last couple of years is work with our intern classes, which has been really, really rewarding. So I'm really excited to be moderating this panel with these three very young and accomplished journalists who, between the three of them, have had many internships. So I'm hoping you guys can just go down the row and tell us, Andy, we'll start with you. Sure. About where you went to school, when you graduated, and what you're doing right now.
Sure. So I'm Andy. I graduated from Harvard in 2018, and I work at the Wall Street Journal in Washington right now.
And what do you do at the Journal?
Part of my job is we have a morning newsletter every day that I write. There's like a section of it that I write, so it's kind of like more of a digital job. And then I help cover Capitol Hill for the Journal.
I'm Catie Edmondson. I graduated from Barnard College in May 2018, and I currently am working for the New York Times in our DC bureau. I am on the Hill with our congressional team, and I have a focus on covering foreign policy up on the Hill.
I'm Ian Brooking. I'm a senior at Coastal Carolina University, and as well as I am the editor of the student newspaper there, the Chanticleer. I'm also working for WPDE ABC 15 News in Myrtle Beach. I am a news editor and prompter director there, where basically I cut and edit the sound bites and news footage for morning newscasts.
Thanks. So I'm hoping that each one of you guys can talk about, I know that I've talked to a couple of people here today who have not yet done internships. So how you took your student journalism experience and turned that into an internship. Anybody can go?
Sure, I can start. So my first internship, I had that after my freshman year of college. It was at the Hartford Courant, Hartford, Connecticut. And so student journalism was important for getting that job in a couple of respects. Obviously, the only journalism I'd ever done in a kind of semi-professional context was student journalism. And so in terms of submitting clips and everything like that, that's really important, obviously. But then more broadly, I actually got that job because I knew a couple of older students who had interned there in previous summers. And so they were able to kind of put me in touch with the editors that they had while they were there. They kind of gave me advice for applying. And so I was kind of following in the footsteps of some people who were older than me. And so that was really helpful in terms of just like getting that job and kind of getting in touch with people at the Courant. So, yeah.
What kind of advice did the students give you?
So it was this older student, Matt Clarida, and he told me that I should be reaching out to some of these editors to say that I was interested in the job, that I should be sending my resume to them, and so that I should be learning a little bit about Connecticut news in Connecticut so that when and if I were interviewed, I would know a little bit of what I was talking about. I'm from Massachusetts, so I didn't know the name of the governor in Connecticut or anything like that, and obviously when you're kind of working in the state, it's useful to know some of that stuff. And then he helped me. He was really helpful in terms of helping me select which clips were good, like I should submit, in terms of having a mix of kind of breaking news features, analysis, stuff like that. This was like my freshman spring, so I didn't have like a lot of work at that point, and so he was really helpful in terms of kind of directing me with that. And then he helped me walk me through the entire process and was very helpful. So I would say it's very helpful to have people like that, obviously.
Catie?
Yeah, I had a similar experience. I was a news writer for our college paper, for the Columbia Spectator. And when I had my first internship after my freshman year of college. It was at a small newspaper in New York City. It's called Gotham Gazette, and I helped to cover City Hall. And that was great to sort of build a base of political reporting, but at the same time, as an intern, and especially right after your freshman year, you're probably going to be writing a lot of fast daily stories, which is great to show that you can quickly turn around a story, but it doesn't really give you those enterprise clips to be able to submit for an internship. And so I found that working on my college newspaper was really a great way to do that, and something that I think helped me stand out to editors was to be able to talk about some of the deeper dive investigative pieces that I did when I was in college, as opposed to sort of the day-to-day, here's what happened clips that I did at my first internship. And the other thing that really helped was my next internship was at the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel, covering the Wisconsin State House. And I had really wanted to work for a specific editor at that paper. I'm from Wisconsin originally, so I grew up reading that paper. And so I emailed him and said, I would love to send you some clips, or could we do a phone call? And he said, oh, it's funny, I'm actually going to be at Columbia for an awards ceremony. I won't have any time to see you, but funny coincidence. And so I knew the person who set up that awards ceremony, and I asked, is it okay if I just come for a little bit? And they said, oh, of course, I'll do a quick story about it, because our readers really want to know about that. And so I went up to the editor and I said, hi, it's so good to see you. I'm the person who emailed you. And I think that sort of impressed him, that I had sort of the moxie to crash his awards ceremony.
That's quite resourceful.
Yeah, and so that was very helpful too. So maximizing all of the resources on your campus helps too.
So I want to back up a little bit with you, Catie, before we move on to you, Ian. So when you were applying for that first internship at Gotham Gazette, so you had only worked at your school paper for a year at that point. So what kind of clips did you submit, and how did you go about finding that first internship?
Yeah, those are good questions. I had a few clips all from my second semester of being on the paper, because the first semester was really me just trying to figure out how to be in college. But by the second semester, I was able to do a few deeper pieces looking specifically at just sort of the chaos between administrators and students organizing our spring concert, which was a very big deal. And I was able to sort of sell this as here's me getting, in the room, basically, intel. And I think I was just looking for any internship that was available at that point, to be honest. I was just scouring job sites. I was asking anyone on the student newspaper if they knew of any publications. And so, especially having such little experience, I was really just applying anywhere and trying to get my name out there.
Wow, okay. Thanks. And Ian, what about you?
Well, I actually haven't never really partaken in an internship. The closest thing to an internship I actually have had is with the football team at Coastal Carolina. I know that doesn't sound like news or journalism at all, but it actually was. I was one of their people that I would film their practices and then watch the practices with the team, and then basically write the scouting report. So in a way, I was kind of like the football's liaison for, like, all right, Florida A&M, when we played them, here's the scouting report on us. Please don't kill us that bad. But I actually started, and what helped me, being from Kentucky is actually what helped me be a part of that program. I grew up in Lexington, Big Blue Nation, Kentucky basketball. So understanding, just a wide variety of sports helped me get to that internship. My knowledge of professional sports, both, all kinds of professional sports, and the coach there really liked me, and I kept on bugging him, saying, hey, here's some of the photos I've taken at sporting events. Hey, this is some of the write-ups I've done on your team. All right, kid, fine, we'll put you up on the scoreboard, which is actually 60 feet in the air, so it's very, very terrifying to film practices like that, but I've been in that position for the last 2 years, and I've loved it ever since.
So it sounds like a common theme for all of you is persistence, and maybe not taking just the conventional path, but also using all the resources that you have. Ian, I'm wondering, did you know that you wanted to be a journalist when you were seeking out that videography job?
Not entirely.
Okay.
I came to Coastal Carolina for marine science. And it's I'm still laughing at it to this day. I've always loved, but my two biggest passions in high school was writing and sharks. And I figured, okay, I figured I'd be one of the guys that, goes out to South Africa and writes about the populations there for National Geographic. Then I realized how bad I am at math. Trigonometry absolutely killed me. And then, while also just failing marine science classes, I was taking English classes and journalism classes and writing for the student paper. What had happened was I found out about the student paper at Coastal just by liking stuff on CCU, like everything. And I found out, the paper was looking for photographers. I started. And my first actual story was a music review about The Weeknd's album in 2015, Beauty Behind the Madness. And, just attending, being more persistent, like, hey, can I get a pass for the football game this weekend? Hey, can I be on the teal turf? They were like, sure, we'll let you on there. And that's how it led to being on that videography job.
Mm-hmm. So, Andy and Catie, I'm wondering if you guys can talk about a little bit your first internship. What was expected of you when you first walked in the door? How did that differ from college writing, and did you feel like you were prepared for it?
I'll say that I was not a very good intern at all at my first internship. It was after my freshman year. I didn't have a ton of experience. I'd only had that 1 year on the student paper. And I think the biggest challenge for me and the biggest thing I learned I need to get better at was that I was not good at pitching stories, my own stories. In the student paper context, I felt like I was getting a lot of direction from editors. And so in terms of what I should be working on any given week, I had people who knew a lot more about the news I was covering, who knew kind of the landscape really well, who were kind of directing me and giving me direction and advice, et cetera. But when I went to the Current after my freshman year, I was on the state politics team. And so I was in the State House, and the politics editor at the paper, she left, I think, during my second week. So I was kind of just an orphan intern for the whole summer, like stuffed away in the State House press room. And like the other reporters had been covering the State House for like decades. And they were like, who's this kid again? Like, you know what I mean? So I had to, and I would just like kind of show up and be like, oh, there's a press conference. I guess I can go to that. I don't know if it's a story. I didn't know like what I should be covering when. And I didn't really have like that, I guess kind of that eye for a good story that I could do, a story that, other reporters at the paper weren't covering, a story that was maybe an opportunity to kind of follow a thread, you know what I mean, in terms of a bill in front of the State House that was controversial or interesting, et cetera. So yeah, my first internship, I just like, took me a while to kind of learn that I had to kind of pitch my own stories, make my own agenda in a lot of ways, because it depends. I mean, the internships I've had in general, it's usually expected that you're pitching your own stuff and that the majority of the stories you're writing are things that you're finding on your own and coming up with. And so just learning that was not something that I had really realized going into it. And so I kind of had to learn that the hard way a little bit my first internship.
So it sounds like it wasn't an ideal internship.
Yeah,
but what do you think that actually ended up helping you in a way?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely, once I kind of got the hang, so I was covering state politics and there had been a like special session. There was like a big budget battle while I was there. And so I was able to kind of follow, once the reporters kind of got the sense that I like needed a little bit of direction, they started to kind of give me some things to work on. And I learned, and this ended up being really useful in later internships, is like once you get on something, even if it seems really small and insignificant, there's almost always kind of more thread you can pull out on it and do follow-up stories, and kind of one story leads to another. And so like, yeah, I mean, there's a couple, like, I look back at some of the stories I did then, and it's kind of like sometimes they feel like very classic intern stories. But I don't know, I learned how to do those type of stories well and got exposure to doing those type of stories, so that my next internship was at the Texas Tribune in Austin, and I was again covering a state government, a much bigger state, and like the stakes of the state government are much larger in a state with 27 million people instead of a few million. But I just knew how to like write about a policy issue, the importance of like finding individual subjects who have a stake in the policy, things like that. So it was a little bit of a bumpy road, but it was like a very fundamental learning experience for later work.
That sounds really good, actually. Yeah. So Catie, what about you? When you showed up to work, what kinds of things were you expected to do? You talked about a little bit the quick hit dailies, but were you prepared, do you think, for that?
I think that working on a good college paper is really great preparation for internships. At every internship that I've had, I've constantly been surprised at how similar they are at its core, even though you're maybe reporting on vastly different things. Sort of the nuts and bolts of it are similar. I think that Andy made a good point. Even at the best internships, a traditional summer internship program will be 10 to 12 weeks, and for the rest of the time, the editors and the reporters in the newsroom are very good at doing their jobs and without having a 20-year-old reporter in the newsroom. And so I think that can be sort of the typical mindset that people have. And so not waiting around to be assigned a story and to constantly be sort of throwing yourself in front of editors and saying, this is an idea that I have, I'd really like to do a story on it. Because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter how inexperienced you are or how young you are, but if you pitch a good story to an editor, they're going to want you to do it. And that was something that I learned at my first internship, I think, because it was a very small publication. It was maybe a dozen people on staff.
Oh, wow.
And so having me come on was very much like, oh, what are we going to do with this person now? And so constantly reading everything that other people are writing within that beat or whatever zone you happen to be in, and reading those stories and thinking, what are the outstanding questions that I have after reading this? What could be a good follow-up story, as Andy was saying, I think is really important, because a lot of times I think editors are just so busy, especially now. They have so many things to be thinking about, and to show that resourcefulness will not only get you more clips, and I think better clips also, but it helps your editor to, I think, give you a good story the next time they actually have one to assign.
And I think you both touched on something. It's finding a niche too, like finding an issue and then, dogging that issue all summer, and that's something that you can own.
Yeah, and I would just say that there is no issue like too small or prosaic for a good story when you're an intern. A clip that I used a while from my first internship was about, in the state budget, they had changed the way that they tax coin-operated car wash machines. So when you're going to like vacuum your car, you have to put in like whatever, 6 quarters. And they had implemented like a 6.25% tax on like $1.50, which comes out to whatever, like 8 cents or something like that. And so there was like a lot of confusion, and as I learned, so they were like, oh, you should look into this. And so I learned there's like a pretty robust car wash lobbying industry in Connecticut that had been opposing this. There's like a car wash lobbying association or whatever, and they had been opposing this forever, and they were very upset about the fact that this had made it into the state budget. And their whole thing was like, this is like, logistically impossible. How can you, people don't have 6.5 cents to put into a machine. Like, and now all these car washes have to raise their prices by 25 cents, and that's like a prohibitive, whatever, business tax, et cetera, et cetera. And so I like went out to like some car washes and like talked to some car wash owners about how they had to raise their prices, and they felt like business was down as a result. But then I like called some of the like lawmakers, like the people on the finance committee who had actually made the budget, and they were like, oh, I didn't realize that was in there. Like, I guess that kind of slipped in. Like, people, like both Democrats and Republicans were like, yeah, next time we'll try and get rid of that. You're right, it doesn't make sense. So like what started as like a pretty like small, like coin-operated car wash machines, you know what I mean? It started off as just like real, I was like, wow, this is probably the most boring thing I've ever had to write about in my entire life. But then I ended up getting like a pretty good story about how like the budget process was so chaotic that like things ended up in it that like the lawmakers themselves hadn't even realized they had put in there. So yeah, just like on this stuff, in terms of like finding your niche, like they're just like the best intern stories I did were on just these like super seemingly obscure like regulatory issues that you're then able to like find interesting characters and interesting angles and like controversies and stuff to it, and you're able to actually get some good stories out of it.
So that car wash one, was that one that was assigned to you, or did you find that one on your own?
I think like one of the reporters I worked with had been like, there's this weird car wash thing, Andy, you should look into it. Like he didn't really know what it was. And so then I like did, and I like, yeah, there was a lot more to it than like it had seen. And it's like a similar thing, like at my second internship at the Texas Tribune, I wrote a lot about like local tree ordinances. There was like this effort to outlaw local tree rules across Texas. So like in a lot of cities in Texas, they like basically, if you can't just like cut down trees on private property, if you like are a developer and you want to cut down trees, you have to plant more trees elsewhere. Anyway, They were like, Andy, we don't know what this tree thing is. Like, look into it. And I was able to do. I spent like the summer reporting on the various angles of this tree issue, and I became like the tree person at the Texas Tribune. So like, yeah, it's like oftentimes it seems kind of lame, but there's usually something interesting to it.
Awesome. Ian, so can you talk a little bit about, you were working at your school paper and now you're working at a TV station. You're juggling both of those things. How did working at the school paper help prepare you for the TV job, if at all? Are they completely unrelated?
In a way, some of them are related. The TV station I work at has a massive coverage area. We cover actually a lower portion of North Carolina, Lumberton, North Carolina, all the way down to Georgetown, South Carolina, which is the midway point between Myrtle Beach and Charleston. And then we go as far as halfway from Myrtle Beach to Columbia, which is Florence. So it's about probably 450 square mile area that we have to cover on TV. So the TV station will only cover coastal Carolina in a way of, oh, the president of the university is being sued, or the football team's doing pretty cool. But for me, the way that my newspaper helped me prepare for my TV job was just, the writing is the same in a way. The story, it's always about your ethics as well. Finding both sides of the stories. I never forget when I went out on a story about anthills for our TV station, because after Hurricane Florence hit, a lot of them were coming up. So we had to go find an expert about ants. And we actually found one. You would be surprised. There's an ant expert in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. And then if you thought that was difficult, finding someone to talk about anthills. We actually I was following our reporter with the camera and everything, and we had to drive into someone's driveway. Like, do you want to talk about anthills? Sure. And they were actually the cutest old elderly couple I've ever met in my life. The wife was like, we hate the ants. They bite my husband when he mows the lawn. Like, I'm like, okay, this is interesting. But when the student paper, how I juggle that is just, I work Sunday through Tuesday, 6 a.m. to 10 a.m. on Sundays and Tuesdays for our morning shows, 4 a.m. to 8 a.m. Monday and Tuesday. So typically for my Monday, I would get up 3 o'clock in the morning. I don't have a car, so I have to walk across a major highway to get to work. I would then cut and edit sound bites, run the teleprompter, catch our shuttle from campus over to the main portion of campus, go to football, film practice, and then go to class, and then meet with the executive staff of our paper to just, all right, what is going on campus today? What has DeCenzo said? And DeCenzo is our president. So I think what also helped prepare me for my news job as well is just the meetings. The meetings are technically kind of the same. We all have story ideas. We pitch them. The news director, who in newsprint is the editor, is like, we need to do some more research on that before we actually talk about going to print or going on air. And I know I've talked with my reporters a lot. Like, that's a great story. You're shooting for the stars, but it's a great story. Let's work on it a little bit more just before. So I think that portion of the student paper helped me with the news TV job. And obviously there's very, very different, and obviously one's on TV, others in print. One is still going to be around while we always hear newsprint is dying. But especially our college paper, we're very, very underfunded. So that's been a problem for us. But I mean, our TV job, my TV job was definitely my newspaper job, was very beneficial for my TV career.
Sounds like it gave you a journalistic foundation to
Yeah.
do the TV work, even though they're different mediums.
Yeah, the foundation was there. I was just learning the different terms like VOSAT and SOTVO,
Right.
packages, how to write for it is different. The writing is different, but that foundation was still there.
Great. So at the Boston Globe, our interns for many years, I don't know if this was still there when you were there, Catie, but they created intern bingo for the class following them. And it was basically a scoreboard of all of the ridiculous stories that they knew that the next intern class would get to. Was this done over by the time you got there?
Yeah, we didn't have that.
The center square was always sharks because being here in Massachusetts on Cape Cod, it's a story every year. There's a shark bite, shark sighting, shark attack, and we like to send the interns out to do the shark stories. It's a fun day at the beach, but it's also writing about sharks. So So that's one thing that I think happens in internships is that you get asked to do stories that maybe are ridiculous or hard, or you're wondering, how am I going to make a story out of this? I was wondering if you guys can talk about a time that happened to you, and how do you handle that?
I was thinking actually on both of these stories, a piece of advice that a reporter in our bureau, Matapuzzo, who is known sort of for the Russia investigation stuff, and he started at a very small paper in New England, I think, and sort of worked his way up. And he said that the best reporters can get really excited about a story about, anthills or car washes. And I think that's true. And so trying to bring that with you into every seemingly ridiculous, arcane story that you write, trying to find something that really excites you or that you find absurd or really funny, is really helpful, because if you can take a piece like that with a sense of humor or find some interesting angle, I think that shows to editors. My first story that I got assigned when I was at the Times for my internship. It was my first day there, and I was talking to the bureau chief, and she said, "Oh, Peter Baker, who's our chief White House correspondent, had this idea about the president's iftar dinner. Go talk to him about it." And I remember thinking, "Oh my God, she wants me to go up to Peter Baker on my very first day and ask him about this story." And so his take on it basically was just that there were some leaders in the Muslim American community who were slighted at the fact that at the president's iftar dinner, he had not invited a single Muslim American to this event that traditionally has been really a bridge between the White House and the Muslim American community. Problem was that dinner had happened like the night or two before I had actually come to the Times, and so I was thinking, I'm not really sure how to make this story work. It's a good story, but I'm running the clock out basically, and it's now 4 p.m. on my first day, so I'm not really going to be able to get a lot done there. And so I was trying to think about what's a way that I can broaden this out and not make it so tied to this one specific event. So I ended up going through all of the president's daily schedules to see if he had had another type of event where he had invited Muslim Americans to talk with them, and in fact, he hadn't. So I ended up broadening it out to be sort of a more analytical story about how the administration has taken a different tack with leaders in Middle Eastern leaders, and how he had done events where he said, "Oh, I love Islam." That was a direct quote. And he would say that, in a room full of leaders from Saudi Arabia, for example, but had not yet convened any sort of event with Muslims back home. And so that was sort of how I got around that, and it ended up doing pretty well for us. But definitely that was an intimidating story on the first day, just because of the time constraints on that one.
The example, I'll go back to the tree example. So basically, the governor had declared a special session of the legislature the summer I was at the Texas Tribune, and he had put like 20 different legislative priorities that he wanted to get accomplished. And one of them was the tree thing, which none of the editors had ever heard of, none of the reporters knew what it was, and they were basically like, "Andy, can you find out what this is?" So basically, they wanted on the state level to get rid of all local tree protections, where basically if like you went out and cut down one of these trees because you wanted to like build a pool or whatever, you'd have to either pay a fine or like pay to like replant trees elsewhere in the city. They just want to like keep the urban forest, is a term I became very familiar with. So I started off like looking into it. I was like, okay, this is interesting. And so I wrote an initial story just kind of explaining what the issue was. I found a woman whose like trees in her neighborhood had been cut down by a real estate developer, and she was really upset, and I kind of walked through the issue. And then the next story I did was the governor had this talking point where he would say he had like lived privately in Austin. He had been the attorney general previously. And like, I tried to cut down a tree in my own backyard, but those socialists in Austin didn't let me. And so I wanted to like find out what actually happened there. So I had been in touch with the city arborist in Austin, who's that's the agency that regulates and the tree cutting stuff in the city. And I had asked, like, do you have, and I had went out and I found through his financial disclosure records, like what the governor's address had been while he was like a private citizen before he moved into the mansion. So I got in touch with the city arborist and I was like, do you have, like, what's the deal with this property? This is like where the governor used to live before he was governor. Like what actually happened there? And so he then sent me all these documents about like what had actually happened. And it turned out that the governor hadn't like wanted to cut down a tree and the city told him not to. He had actually tried to expand his property and build a pool, and he had damaged the roots of a Texas like pecan tree, which are like protected. And then he had to pay a fine to the city of Austin, like a pretty, it wasn't that hefty, it was like a few $100s, but he had like killed this like protected, like, you know, staple Texas tree. And so I like was able to like break this story about like what had actually happened with like the governor's tree and like undercut his talking point, which was like small, you know, it's a small thing. But I was pretty excited about it when like the city arborist sent me all these documents about like, yeah, he had the pool mansion and like he's like, trying to build a pool, blah, 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 and he damaged the roots. I was like, this is so, yeah, I was this was like my third week. So like the editors loved that. This was like, and this, a lot of other like Texas outlets picked it up afterwards because it was just kind of embarrassing for him.
Yeah.
And I had a very, the city arborist was a very good source for me. And then after, I mean, then once I had once I was like the tree person after that, I just like kept going at it. And it turned out that a lot of the legislators that were introducing this bill to like get rid of these tree regulations, a lot of them had themselves been real estate developers for a long time, in some cases in the city of Austin, or they were receiving a lot of money from real estate developers. And so then I did a story about that. And so it was just like, and then like as it went through the legislature, I was able to follow it. So it was just one of those things where I was like able to like broaden it into like a bigger story and just like made it kind of my thing for the summer.
Okay, both of you guys are wrong. Neither of those are bad story ideas, assignments that were given to you. They were great assignments. But I did want to ask you, since you both did 3 internships by the time you graduated?
I had 2 previously.
Okay. So you had the Current and the Texas Tribune?
Yeah, and then I was an intern at the Journal, and then
the Journal, okay.
Yeah, I did 3. Yeah.
Okay, 3. So it seems like you each started at a very small place and worked your way up to the next higher or larger market. And then you were able to turn those final internships. Your final internship was at the Journal. Yours was at the Times, Catie. How were you able to turn those internships into a job? Because many people are not going to start out at the Journal or at the New York Times. So can you talk about that a bit?
We were discussing this beforehand, and I think part of it is just being really lucky and having timing work out for you. So part of it for me was around the time my internship with the New York Times was supposed to come to a close. We had a correspondent on the Hill who was shifting over to do more investigative work, and so they needed someone to fill in that spot, essentially. But I think one of the ways that I ended up becoming someone, I guess, on the list to potentially just slide over and have me fill in that spot was because I had a good rapport with our congressional editor, who's my editor now. And I really do think, I'm still convinced, I've never spoken with him about it explicitly, but I'm kind of convinced to this day, the start of this was that I used to come in really early for just the start of the day. Most reporters at our paper will come in maybe 10 o'clock in the morning, which sounds late, but they're there really late into the evening, so it's a long day. But the editors will come in at 9-ish because they have a big 9:30 meeting with New York. And so I used to come in a little bit before 9, and I sat at this desk. And this also shows you, I think, how tiny things matter. But I used to sit at a desk that wasn't assigned to me. Another reporter told me I could sit there because it was right by the editors. And so they'd be chatting about something, and I could overhear them and go, oh, you need someone to help out with that? I'll do it. Or, they would look around and say, oh, we need someone to cover this. Well, our star reporters are, out doing that very important story. So yeah, we'll give it to the intern. Because I was supposed to sit on the floor below where they would have never seen me. And I think I would have been out of mind just because they're so busy. So I would get there really early in the morning. And one day, our Congress editor came over to me, and he had a news clipping from the Wall Street Journal, actually, about a story that he wanted me to follow. And he said, people on my team are too busy right now. Why don't you just take a look at this? And so I did, and it ended up being sort of a longer storyline about sexual abuse that occurred in the late 70s and early 80s at Ohio State University, the wrestling team, and as it turned out, several other athletic teams. And the reason it fell in the Congress docket was there's a prominent Republican congressman who was at Ohio State during the time this was happening. And so the Wall Street Journal had an item about it, and he said, why don't you just take a look at this? And so I made some calls, and I ended up writing a short story about it that day, and I just kept following it, basically. And so I really do think that a large part of the reason he just happened to slide that over to my desk was because I happened to be there before a lot of the other reporters were there. And then I was able to do a story at the end of the day. But I think just being visible helped me a lot.
Yeah, for me, I mean, I think that's. I'd also say I feel like Catie is being too modest about the follow-up stories she did. They were, they were very good. They weren't just like regular follow-up stories. I would say so. For me, I like kind of knew that I feel like for me, the first step was trying to get extended as an intern, was to try and lengthen my time at the Journal, to try and give myself more time to prove myself as someone that they would want to hire, to kind of do more stories, get more clips, to spend more time around the editors. So I knew, like, going into the summer that at some point I was basically going to ask if I could stay longer. So I waited, like, I worked, obviously, just like being as diligent and kind of persistent as possible for like 5 weeks. And then I came in one morning, and my editor at the Journal, she's someone, I basically just went up to her in the morning before a lot of the other reporters were there, because I wanted to get there in case I was denied. I didn't want that to like happen in the middle of the newsroom. But I also like didn't know, I wasn't like, oh, can we like have, like, I didn't feel like I could like request a private meeting or something. So I just went up to her desk in the newsroom, and I was like, I don't have any plans after the end of my internship in August. I know it's busy with the midterm election. If you ever needed any additional help, I would be very happy to stay. Basically how I phrased it, and because obviously you don't want to like set yourself up for being like no. And so then she was like, okay, like I can think about that or talk about it. And then kind of I don't even think I had to like email to follow up to be like, hey, is about a week later I was like, do you think I can stay? And she was just like, yep, like sure, basically. And so that was just, I kind of like, there's some, obviously you want to be delicate about it, but I think sometimes I don't know about asking for a job, but I think being persistent.
Why not?
Yeah, I mean.
But the worst they can say is no.
Right, I think saying like, especially, I would wait a little bit until you've like shown that you can like kind of do the basics like blocking and tackling, but and whether, I think it's also good, like obviously you want to have a good relationship with your editor or your direct supervisor, but getting to know other reporters in the Bureau who might have a better sense of the possibilities, professional possibilities in the Bureau, they may be able to advise you about how to best go about navigating that.
And outside the Bureau.
Yeah, too. And outside the Bureau. So yeah, I mean, I was in touch with other reporters who kind of had helped me and given me some intel about like what was going on and the positions that might, like the possibilities basically. And then I would also say another thing I had started to do is that I think it's just like always think that you have to be applying for jobs, because you don't know if you're going to get extended or if you're going to get a real job. I didn't know that. And so I was also just kind of continuously looking for stuff in the hopes that maybe even if I did get something, then I could like go back to my current employer and be like, hey, I have this opportunity in the fall, but I'd really like to stay here if possible. And so it's like always looking for a job, even if you want to stay in your current job, is good, so that you kind of can basically get some leverage and like be like, if I'm not here, I'll be at a competitor. And that might also accelerate their desire to like keep you on. So that's how that.
So it doesn't sound like luck at all. It sounds like you both were very strategic about it. And also you had worked hard and had work to show that gave the editors confidence in hiring you. And also it sounds like you were doing a lot of reporting also to help your own career, like talking to other reporters. And I think that's, and gathering intelligence. I think that's really key and important.
I'm someone who like networking is like not a term I like or like want to think that like my career is advanced because I've been able to network. But when I think about it as like another like type of reporting, basically, both in terms of finding an internship and then trying to get a job in terms of like just reaching out to people, trying to get an understanding of what's going on, what the possibilities are, what the dynamics are, like where else there could be jobs. It's like, I think thinking about it, as an extension of just like your job as a reporter is very useful.
So I'm going to ask Ian to talk about that, about networking too, and maybe the importance of conferences like this and finding opportunities. And then I'm going to open it up for questions from you guys. So.
Sure. So besides the Georgia, I've come to the Georgia conference twice now before here. My first time was a freshman when I was a horrible marine science student in 2016, and I got to talk with Michael Resendez, who was the Boston Globe reporter on the Spotlight team that helped break the story about the sexual abuse scandal within the Catholic Church. That really, I think, was the turning point for me when I knew I wanted to be a journalist. To be honest. I actually watched the movie Spotlight the night before I came up, and at the time, right before I came up for this conference, Coastal was going through a problem with their basketball team. One of their players had been charged with something in a relationship with a woman and sexual assault, and I was the sports reporter. I had to figure out how to ask that question to someone that I had known all year long, as got to know this player, and actually coming to this conference really helped me open up as a journalist. Like, all right, if he can go up to obviously Spotlight, we all know what happened within that movie. We all know what Resendez and all the whole team had to go through. This conference really helped me prepare for asking the tough questions and being more upfront with your university. We all know that our university is gonna have some shady stuff going on behind. We've seen it, we've reported it, and not just this conference, but the national conferences I've also attended. I've got to go to Dallas, Texas, in November of last year, no, 2 years ago, and Bob Schieffer of CBS was the main speaker, and actually getting to sit. It was actually during the time when Colin Kaepernick was in the news and everything, and sitting and talking with a man that I watched growing up on CBS, Meet the Press and everything for years, seeing what he went through as a reporter in his days at in Dallas and at TCU, and just talking with people like that, your idols, and just talking with other journalists as well at these conferences really helped me move forward as, hey, knowing that you guys are going through this as well, the same as I am, was like, okay, we're not all alone here. We all know, and the best advice I can give taking away from these conferences, just talk with each other. You might be, you might go to Columbia and you might be going on Florida A&M, but you might be, experiencing the same kind of similar situation that, you can give advice to.
That's great. Thank you, Ian. All right, so anybody have questions?
And please, if you have anything on this as well.
Okay.
Have you guys had any experience cold emailing editors or cold emailing people, and how do you suggest going about that? Because I feel like as journalists in general, or as like student journalists, it feels kind of weird getting out of your bubble and oh, maybe I'm bothering these people, or I know they're busy, so I'm not going to email them. So how do you go about that?
I can start with this one actually, because I recently have been on the receiving end of a lot of cold messages recently via LinkedIn mostly. And I think one, having a really good reason why you're emailing that person in particular, and having some sort of specific ask for them, whether it is, I'm interested in your internship program because I read this series that you guys put out and was really blown away by the depth of reporting. And, here's a short thing about me, and I'd love to talk with you about how you did that, or I'd love to talk with you about internship opportunities because I'd love to learn more about how you were able to do this type of reporting. That, I think, is effective. Also, editors and reporters are people who like being praised for things that they've done in the past. I recently have gotten a lot of messages actually from people who want to apply to the New York Times, but they're looking for jobs like doing software development for us, or it's very clear that they saw that I work for the New York Times and thought, oh, I'll just shoot her a message. And that, especially because I get a lot of these messages now, those I'm less likely to respond to because I don't know how to help. I don't know how to help them. That's not, my wheelhouse at all. So having a specific reason why you're emailing that person and being able to say something specific about why you like their work or their paper's work, I think is really effective because you can also tell when you're getting an email that was copy and pasted and sent to 12 different people.
It's true. So true.
Yeah, Oh, sorry. Yeah, you go ahead.
I think for me, I actually just emailed my boss saying, hey, how do I move up as a, being the low boss on the totem pole as a news editor, all the way up to a on-air reporter? And at the time, I probably held on to that email for about 2 months because I had no idea. I didn't want to say I don't want to bother her. I don't know when I could set up a meeting with her. But I think one of the best things of advice I can say is tell them how much you actually like working at that company. Because if you want to move up within your own, like how I do, I think that's how they like hearing that. Hey, I like to move up, or as Catie mentioned, how you like the piece that they worked on. I think for me is if you show them how much that job means to you, they're more likely to respond. I know that when I messaged my news director, I said, I know I don't have the experience yet, but what can I do to get to that point? And she said, you have to have 2 years of this. You have to have at least this. She laid out all these guidelines, and take those guidelines and see if you're willing to do that. If you're willing to work for that to get to that point.
Andy, have you had luck doing that?
Oh, yeah, I was just going to add everything Catie said, I think, is on point. And then I would also just add, volume is a very helpful, just sending out a lot of requests. Don't take kind of like a stock response. Even if you do, craft a very skillful, particular, specific message, some people will still just say, oh, you should make sure you apply by the deadline. Thanks. You know what I mean? Some people just might not have the time or the inclination to help a young journalist. You kind of have to get lucky and find someone who is willing to help you, and not for a number of reasons, not everyone is going to be that person. So not even a rejection where someone said oh, we don't interview candidates before we actually interview candidates or whatever. For me, you just gotta, I think, just trying what might seem like unlikely paths to actually connecting with someone is worth it. I mean, I think talking to former interns who can then maybe get you in touch with people who are still at the paper is good, and then they can kind of refer you. I think just you have to try a lot of stuff. I think anything in the application process, you'll get rejected or not get a substantive response as in reporting, way more often than you do get something that's actually legitimately helpful. For me, I know at the Journal, I had gotten an email my sophomore year at the paper. An alumni had emailed me basically critiquing an article I did. He was like, oh, you should have had this stuff higher. Basically, he sent me this pretty curt, it was Julian Barnes, who's now at the Times actually. He sent me an email. He was at the Journal in Brussels for a while. He sent me an email unsolicited my sophomore year being you should have had your original stuff before. Anyway, he criticized my work, and I was like, thank you for the feedback. And then I didn't talk to him again for years. But then my senior fall, I was applying, and the Journal was one of the places I was applying to, and I was trying a number of different avenues to try and connect with someone there. And so I shot him an email being hey, I have no idea if you remember me, but you emailed me once in 2016 or 2017. I'm applying to the Journal. Do you have any advice as I'm applying? And it was also helpful because he was an alumni of the same school paper. And he immediately, and I didn't have a super meaningful connection with him. I had never met him. We never spoken on the phone or anything like that. He was these are the people you got to contact with. Send me your clips. I'll make sure I get in front of the record. He was immediately it was a very lucky break where he just was I don't know whether it was that's the way he is or just that night he was yep, I'll help this person. But he was extremely helpful.
That's the way he is.
Yeah. He got in touch with, he put me in touch with other people who were at the Washington Bureau, and then they put me in touch with other, it was just you kind of connect the dots. And so so you just got to get lucky, I guess, is part of it always.
And I'll just add really, really briefly, for me, 2 things. One is getting the right person. If you, as Catie was mentioning, if you're emailing me about something in sports, you clearly haven't taken the time to read our website and figure out what my job is. And the second thing that absolutely puts people on my shit list, if they send me an email and then send me an email the next day that sort of is, if I don't respond in what they think is immediately, then getting a shitty note back and saying, hey, give editors, a little time, because sometimes, someone might be, even a reporter might be out on assignment and they won't get back to you for a couple days or maybe a week. So give people a reasonable amount of time. And if you haven't heard back, try something else or try them again, but gently. Anything else? Oh, yes?
So I'm a sophomore, and for the past year, I've been writing and editing for my paper's art section. But for the past couple months or so, I've been really interested in transitioning into news, and the vast majority of the internships that I applied to for this summer are news internships at various publications. So just from your knowledge, are publications open to taking people from like different sections, you know, even if they still maybe have a lot of writing and editing experience?
Do you guys feel like you can answer that, or are you asking me? Or?
I feel like it really just comes down to being able to show what type of reporting you've done, regardless of what role that you're in. Editing, I think, is harder for at least probably editors who are looking at someone's clips. It's harder to discern. But for example, if you did like a really great expose on, you know, an administrative funding issue, administration cutting off funding to like an arts group on campus after they did an interpretive protest dance, for example. Like that would be something I would think as an editor, like, oh, this is really solid reporting. This is reporting on an issue that people care about in the arts community at that school. I would think that would give you points. So I think at the end of the day, it just comes down to, regardless of sort of what section you're in, because any, section, especially I think like sports, art, there's a lot of great fodder there to report on campus.
Yeah, I guess my assumption, or the thing that I wanted to show most to editors who are reviewing like an application I had submitted, is that I feel like not at the very least, but that I could do reporting. I think like you want to show that you know how to like make a lot of phone calls, like get people's names right, like do it on deadline. I think like, obviously, I mean, I always thought, or my assumption was, and this might be the wrong assumption, is that like showing that you're a solid reporter and you can be reporting on whatever, I think is probably more important than showing that obviously they want to know that you can write well and everything, but like they can't hire an intern who can write but not report, and they might hire an intern who can report but maybe needs to work on their writing, because they just can't. I don't think a news organization can like send out an intern to cover something and not have confidence that intern knows kind of the basics of, asking the who, what, when, where, how, you know what I mean? Just I think showing whatever type of work it is, like showing that you know how to report something, I think is the key.
Answer your question?
Yeah.
Yes?
So for those of us going into internships over the summer, I'm actually going to be working on a paper in Milwaukee, not the journalistic.
Which one?
Business Journal. And I was wondering what you guys found was the hardest thing to adjust to going into a more professional setting, and what you did to address that.
So I guess for me, it wasn't necessarily, so maybe two things. One was different editors have different papers have different styles that they like. They're looking for different things. And I think once you are at a paper for maybe a month, you really start to get into a rhythm. And I think a lot of editors sort of have a specific formula that they like stories to follow. And so figuring out what that is, and also what rises to the level of a story for that publication, is I think one of the things that is initially more challenging to figure out. When I started my internship at the New York Times, I put a lot of thought into, before I pitched a story, is this a New York Times level story, or would this be more of like a regional paper story, because there is a difference. So I think figuring that out can be difficult at first, and the best way to do that is to just read everything that's being published by your fellow reporters, and to also look really closely at the edits that your editor gives you, and ask questions if you have any about why they retooled things the way they did, and to try to just follow that for your next story. The other thing is less about working in a professional environment, and it's more just acclimating to a new city or a new beat. And again, it's sort of the same advice of just soaking up all of the other stories that you can read, both that your colleagues are doing and that your competitors are doing, and placing a lot of phone calls too. Being able to say that you're new, actually, I think can be really helpful, because sources will want to help a nice young reporter. So saying, I just started and I know that you have so much information about X, Y, and Z, and I've heard from so many people you're the expert here. I'd love, to hear your thoughts. People will just talk and talk to you. and you can pick up story ideas from that. So I'd also say try to use being new to your advantage.
I think understanding the pacing of that news environment as well. I know from us, the Shawnee Clear newspaper that I work at was weekly, and then now we go monthly. But what helped with the transition was our website, having more and more content and everything up on our website each day. When I started at WPDE, I actually witnessed what it's like to work at, what you guys probably do at daily newspapers. You get a story at 9 a.m., you go out, you write the story, and then you publish it. Obviously, from TV, it comes out that night or that late evening. I think understanding that that's how it's going to work for each and every day. Because I came in there at 4 o'clock in the morning one day, I'm like, all right, I'm just going to chill. Then all of a sudden, like, I'm getting barked by like 20 different people, like, do I have this? Do you have this? Is that done? Is that done? No. Okay, I'll get right on that. I think understanding just what it's like being in that real world environment, even though some of you guys who are part of a daily paper, you understand that just a bit, it's even more heightened in a more professional news environment, like the New York Times or at a TV station.
Is this going to be your first internship?
Second.
Second, okay.
Yeah, I would just say like reading the paper's coverage as much as possible before you show up there is like really important, I would say, and like having an understanding of what kind of areas they focus on, and then if there are any areas you think that maybe they don't cover as much that you could then start to cover, I think is another key thing. I think one question that I would get asked by editors a lot that I would get nervous about my response would be like, so what are you interested in covering? And it'd be like, what should I be interested in covering? What basically is what I would want to say. And so like, if you can like be a little savvy about like what seems like something that they're really interested in or something that they aren't covering that maybe they would cover or that, competing outlets are covering, and you can maybe try and like plug a hole there is another. And obviously that, if you're able to do all of that before you even show up, that would be very impressive. But, just reading things with that thought in mind, I guess.
I just want to make a plug also for something that I did not know or think about in my first internship a long time ago, and that's understanding the norms of the office and expectations, what time you need to show up, what other people wear to work. It seems really, really basic, but there are a lot of interns who, roll in at 11 and everybody else comes in at 9, and they have no idea that people have been working and that intern's not going to get assignments, so just like understanding. And I think that when people ask up front, what do you expect for deadlines? When do you want me to file stories? How often should we be having conversations? When's a good time to come to your desk? And understanding that early on with whoever your editor is going to be, I think is will set you up for success. Yes.
I just had a question in terms of for people wanting to get a job in journalism, fresh out of college. How would you be able to kind of sell yourself or distinguish yourself amongst the other applicants when, usually most of your reporting is based on the college level, and college newspapers don't generally have the same level of, I want to say, for lack of a better term, like power that, like other media outlets would have. Mostly, for most of us, we're reporting on campus news. Mm-hmm. So how would you kind of like sell yourself and make yourself?
I think that's a great question for you guys to answer, but also there's one of the breakout sessions that's after this is going to address that very issue too. So I don't know if you're planning to go to that, but that's the resume, I think, one. I know they're planning to talk about that, but if you guys have answers for that.
I would just say like things that happen on campus are still real news events, and to kind of describe them as being skills that you would use at a real paper to be like, oh, I covered crime on campus, like I have experience with police reporting, for example, or to say I covered, police is like the best example, but like, you could talk about if you covered like the student government, or like if there's like a faculty council or senator or whatever, like I have experience covering like deliberative legislative bodies. Like I think trying to take stuff you've done in a student paper context and a campus context and relating it to, or kind of presenting it as analogous to what happens in the real world, in some ways a student or a campus government is not unlike like a town council or a city government or whatever. So basically keeping that in mind and trying to spin it in a way that seems like it's more part of the real world, which it is part of the real world, but.
I agree with all of that. I also think trying to create sort of a narrative for yourself to sell to papers, and to also be able to loop in why you'd be a good fit there in particular, why you're applying to that paper. is really important too, because I imagine that at places like, the Wall Street Journal, you've got tons of people who are applying because they know it's a really good paper, but maybe won't be able to say more about why they want to work there past that. And so being able to say, this is the type of reporting that I'm interested in doing, and here is my experience doing courts and crime. And here, I think also having a variety, having a range to show of pieces, so not just all breaking news, but a good mix of breaking news, maybe features, so you can show that you can do really good writing that's really compelling and brings people in, and also some enterprise stories, some investigative stories. I think having a good mix of those also sort of shows that you're a well-rounded applicant.
And also, college media, as many of you guys know, covering your institution that you're going to school is, in some ways, much more challenging than interviewing city council people who are used to talking to the press, and they expect, and a lot of school officials aren't used to being challenged by students. And so it's more challenging and more difficult. So I think that as Catie said, if you can build that narrative of, here are the challenges I faced as a student journalist covering this story, and we were still able to get this. I think hiring editors know what the limitations or challenges are for students, but I think that's a good narrative that you can also build for yourself.
I would also say, I think you get a lot of, you definitely get more experience in a campus context with more kind of, I don't know if adversarial is too strong of a word, but covering, kind of more an adversarial relationship with what you're covering. All of the experience I have, working with aggressive spokespeople is stuff I got on campus. The public affairs apparatus at Harvard is very large and powerful, and they will so learning to deal, there's some stuff that I got way more experience on campus that's applicable to covering a place like Washington than I did in my actual professional experience.
Questions? Yes?
I just want to know, when you first start working in a new city, how would you familiarize yourself into that community?
Learn the name of the mayor and stuff like that. Definitely, I didn't know that. Geez, I'm trying to think of stuff beyond that.
Yeah, so I mean, when I moved to Boston to intern at the Globe, I was reading the Boston Globe every single day for a few months before I actually came to the city, because I wanted to get a sense of what are the issues that you see in the paper every single day that maybe just appear in briefs, but they're always there. So I ended up covering or doing some coverage of the opioid crisis when I was an intern, and I didn't know anything about Massachusetts or Boston, when I got the internship, but then I kept reading the paper and I would see these little briefs, and it seemed like every single day, there was a little blurb about someone dying of an overdose or another arrest that had been made. And so you start to build these themes and these narratives in your head about what are the issues that matter in that community. But also I think just at the end of the day, talking to as many people as you can, even if it's you're on the bus going to work, just chatting with people next to you and asking what's on their mind. It can be an informal way to pick up stories that maybe aren't in the paper that should be.
I think for me, when it came to being, going into a TV station, I had been at, Coastal in the area for about 3 years, but obviously our campus paper, a whole lot smaller than a TV station that covers, obviously very, very, so I think for me when I first started there, I was okay, what are some of the, things that I started watching our local news, which is something I really didn't do before I started working there. I started watching, okay, so what's going on in Darlington? What's going on in Lumberton and Florence? Yeah, and all of a sudden, you figure out, okay, Mark Huea, he worked for Myrtle Beach. You start figuring out who these people are, understanding what are the big issues, because an issue in Myrtle Beach might not be different, might not, people in Florence won't care about something like that. So I think understanding just that, especially for a large area, understanding the certain, little cities that, they have their own little issues, and then also the whole state might have its own issue as well.
So I think we have time for one or two more questions. You had your hand up.
Yeah, well, you mentioned not having a car, and I wonder how, as somebody that has how do you work with a low amount of resources to find internships or jobs when a lot of jobs will straight up say you need a car to do stuff like this. How do you balance having a low amount of resources as a young person?
I think it's just dedication, to be honest. I think, I'll never forget after Hurricane Florence, granted the storm had surpassed, but we were still feeling the effects of it. I had taken all my stuff back, and then 12 hours later they said, we need you to come back in because Hurricane Michael is forming in the Gulf. I packed up a small backpack and walked in a thunderstorm, water up to here, in a road where there wasn't any, where there should have been a road, but there wasn't. And I think, when the news director saw me walk in, like, did you walk here? Yeah, because there's no Lyft or Uber drivers anywhere in the area. She's like, oh, okay. I think it's just showing that you're dedicated to your work as a journalist. You're dedicated to just your career. Showing that that's because not just showing your dedication. You're passionate about it. You're willing to go above and beyond and walk through a hurricane to get to your job. That's what I try to do.
Do you guys have answers to this? I have a very passionate answer. Okay. I think it's absolutely horrible that there are unpaid internships and that there are internships that don't pay a living wage. And if I could magically change all of that, I would. I'm thinking about some ways that I can help with that in the future, but right now I have no answer for it. However, there are internships that don't require cars. The Boston Globe is now one, only because we don't have a parking lot, no one can drive to work. So the interns sign up, I think you guys did the sign up for Zip cars, and it's through a Boston Globe account, and there's a Boston Globe Uber account. So I think that there are places that do make it, and we also pay a living wage, I think. Okay. So there are places, and I think sometimes it's harder to get to those places. And I think what Ian is doing, where he's working part-time and he's in school, so he's able to get some professional experience. If you're unable to take an unpaid internship, maybe that's the way to get the experience that you need in order to get an internship at the next higher level later on, where you do get paid and you can show up without a car. It's hard. There's so many places now that don't pay, but I think that if you're just really diligent about researching, and maybe somebody should start a website of like, here's the internships where you don't need cars and and they pay well. That would be a really good resource.
I made a spreadsheet of all of the internships that just had, or the newspapers that just had openings with sort of what their requirements were, if they were only taking seniors, how much they paid, and when their closing date was, and that was really helpful. And then we shared it actually. So
Where did you find that information?
You just have to look
on every website.
On every website,
We
yeah.
actually have that
Reporting.
on the George's conference website for this year. We've added a pretty comprehensive list. It's not by car or no car, but it's where you can find links, and I'll send that around again just so that you have the link.
Yeah, I would say the car thing in particular is tough because obviously if you don't have a car, you can't just like just buying a car is obviously kind of crazy. I was lucky enough, one summer I used my mom's car, so my maternal grandmother's car, and then another summer I used my paternal grandmother's car. So like, obviously not everyone maybe you don't have grandparents that can give up a car, but like maybe like I tried stuff and I got lucky in that way. So I would just, that's like the one other thing. I would say, but in general, the unpaid internships and everything are terrible.
All right, I think one more question, Sam, or?
Yeah, you can
Okay.
do one more.
Do any of you guys have plans to go to J school after having been in the working world for a little bit? Is it something they encourage, like at the Journal and the Times specifically?
I think my thoughts on getting a journalism degree specifically, I think that because I did the student paper so much as an undergrad and then I have all this professional experience already, I don't think it would be it's not something that I'm considering doing, I guess. I think that it's helpful if you want to have the experience to like get more internships or more kind of pre-professional experience. But I think for somebody like me, it's not something I'm thinking about considering really.
Yeah, I agree with that. I have a friend who went to journalism school because he was pivoting basically in his career. He thought he was going to be a historian, decided he wanted to be a journalist, and he had already graduated from college. So he didn't have the opportunity to do internships as a college student or work on a campus newspaper. And so that's why he went to journalism school. And I think it served him really well. He's doing really great stuff at a paper in Arizona now, but for me personally, it's not really something that I would consider because I almost feel like working on my campus newspaper and then all of the internships that I did taught me the lessons that I would be paying money for if I went to journalism school, so yeah.
I would say, yeah, maybe if you're interested in like a very specialized type of journalism, or like you really want to become an expert on data journalism, or maybe like really sophisticated business journalism or foreign journalism if you want to like get language skills or something like that, it's useful. But I think otherwise, I think my understanding of what you learn in journalism school, and I haven't gone to journalism school, so maybe I'm wrong, but I think a lot of it is kind of the stuff that you learn more, you can learn organically just by doing it.
I think for me, when it came to our school does not have a journalism program. It's a communications program. My concentration is interactive journalism, which is basically broadcast and print. So I've had a heavy journalism. Yeah, I think all my classes this year are journalism classes. But for me, what I intend to do is actually get a master's in communications. I understand that that's not a master's in journalism, but it opens you up to this world of journalism. Actually opens you up to talking to so many different people. You're talking with PIOs, public relations officials, and one of the things that I intend to try to do is get a master's in communication advocacy, which allows me to work in public relations. So should I ever, say, okay, I've had enough of, being on the reporting, I like to be on the interviewing side, being that PIO for Boston Police Department or something like that. That program will help me, get to that point. So I think it's just looking at all your options, understanding what's best for you is the advice I would give.
Right, I think that's all we have time for, so thanks to the panel and